50% of women abandon their careers in tech by the age of 35.
We think that's unacceptable, and it's exactly why we started this podcast.
I'm Jo Keneally, tech veteran and writer.
And I'm Jarisha Nadaraju, product ops leader and startup advisor.
We're The Other Half, a podcast for ambitious women navigating their way.
This episode is brought to you by PCX Pay, helping businesses move money across borders with speed, clarity, and control. Simplify your payments infrastructure at pcxpay.com. We've partnered with Clue for Season 3 of The Other Half. Clue is the science-backed period and cycle tracking app that helps you understand your body, from cycle predictions and hormone insights to fertility tracking and mood patterns. As a listener of The Other Half, you have exclusive access to a whole free year of Clue Plus. Just head to the link in the show notes to claim it.
On today's episode, we're joined by Catt Small, influence expert and staff product designer. Catt has written a book and delivers courses on the topic of influencing without authority for individual contributors. Hi Catt, welcome to the Other Half podcast. We're delighted to have you here.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
So you are a influence expert. You run a workshop focused on teaching people how to influence without authority, and now you have a book on that too. When you talk about influence without authority, what does that actually mean in practice, and what does that actually look like for an IC or an individual contributor on a day-to-day level when it's done well?
Yes. So influence without authority means that you are a well-connected individual at your company who can't directly make decisions about really important things like, for example, who gets put onto what project, or should we go in this or that direction with how we are planning to roll out a product or treat an experience within a product. However, your ideas are heard by other people and taken into account. And so I have a friend, Micah Bennett, who is actually who I actually interviewed as part of the process of writing my book about this topic. And I really appreciate how Micah put it, which is that people will talk about your ideas and attribute your ideas to you when you're not in the room. And that is a great example of how you know that you are becoming more influential. You'll also notice in my experience, leaders have started to ask me questions and consult me for my opinion. And that's another way that I've noticed when I am becoming more influential. So I think day to day, it looks like people coming to you and asking you for advice. It looks like people reaching out to you and saying, hey, somebody told me that you were thinking about this, and they'll ask you questions about that. It can also look like if you have to present on a topic to leadership, say that a decision needs to be made and you have a recommendation, then, if they actually listen to you, then that's a really good sign. And the process of building influence, mostly for me at least, involves a lot of live conversations, honestly. So throughout your day, in addition to blocking out focus time to do your actual hands-on design work, you ideally are also connecting live with people for somewhere around 30 minutes every week or 2 weeks or month. It really depends on the person, but you want to ideally have a network of people across the company that you're connecting with on a regular basis. And those people are at different levels of authority themselves or have different levels of power. And the idea is that you essentially, you have some well-connected high power individuals, and then you have some people who are closer to the ground who can kind of give you the tea from a different angle.
Give you the tea. I really like that. I think your point on being well connected is really interesting. And I wonder how you think about the balance between staying connected and not overloading people's calendars with meetings, because usually, I will say, in every company I've worked in, one of the main complaints that people have is I have too many meetings. And I've personally sometimes felt reluctant to just put in a standing meeting to catch up. So how do you think about approaching that? Or do you think actually we should just forget about, feeling awkward about it and just do it?
I think that it's very reasonable to be concerned that you are either not going to have a bunch of time to do your hands-on work, and some people do over-index on meeting too often. But then if you are also never communicating with people who have more power than you or people who are your peers, if you don't have that one-to-one time with those people, then you are missing out on the chance to get to know that person and what matters to them more deeply, which is the foundation for building influence. So my advice, number one, of course, is, make sure that you are building out blocks of time for yourself to actually focus on your hands-on work, but then figure out what time of day would be best potentially to block out some time to actually socialize and talk to people. So most of my days will look like 2 hours in the morning at least to do focus time. And then I will probably have 2 to 3 hours of conversations, design crit, etc. So, where I can sprinkle in a one-to-one, I will. I will say that for me, the way that I treat one-to-ones is, if I have time, then I will put in the effort. And if I do not have that time, then I'm going to move it around. I'm going to claw back that time, but that is me sacrificing. And then usually at the end of the day, I have another 2 hours to just do focus time again. And so, again, like 2 to 3 hours, it really depends, but ideally throughout the day, every day, I'm at least getting 4 hours worth of focus time in. And that's, on a solid day. If I need to, again, I will take the time back and I will just agree with everybody. I'm not going to any meetings. I'm going to move all my one-to-ones, etc. So I think there are ways to be flexible, and you do have to think about what kind of work you need to deliver and by when. But say that you don't have gigantic time pressure, then my recommendation would be to look at the people who are influential to your work, or who can decide, who can make decisions, or who has power to convince a certain person to make certain decisions. And then I would consider how often you can connect with those people. Sometimes it's ad hoc and you just have to set a reminder to yourself on your own calendar that you should reach out to this person if you need to on a semi-regular basis. But other times I will connect with a person, either, it really depends. So if it's my peer and they're a product manager, for example, I meet with that person at least weekly, one-to-one, if not potentially daily, depending on what we're working on. So right now I have a project that I'm working on, and my PM and I are meeting every day, pretty much one-to-one, to just jam through ideas together. So that's one example, because the PM ultimately does decide what's in scope. So I really want to have a strong relationship with that person. And then you have people like the director of product design, who that person is going to also have a lot of feedback and be pretty influential in terms of what gets done and what doesn't get included. And I want to have a good relationship with that person. So I'm going to pitch for a meeting maybe once a week or once every 2 weeks, depending on what that person's availability looks like. And so I would rather ask and get turned down, or I would rather ask and we realize we have to do monthly because that person just doesn't have the capacity. But if I don't put myself out there at all and suggest that we have the conversation on a semi-regular basis, then it's the thing where you miss 100% of the shots you don't take, like you should ideally put yourself out there and make it known. I've actually had a couple of folks come to me during coaching conversations and ask about this exact topic. And through the conversation, we realized that they were kind of scared of being a burden. But I think that the way to avoid that is to share the intention and ask what cadence would work for the person. So maybe again, it's a standing monthly. Maybe it's every 3 months we meet. That's still something. And then if you need more time, you can always grab it as necessary.
It's great. I definitely think I felt into that, like, feeling like a burden category before, so I think just going for it is definitely good advice. And we're going to touch on different types of influence later, but I guess being an IC or an individual contributor, how does building influence as an IC fundamentally differ from that of being a manager?
It's challenging because, well, I think it's definitely different. I mean, I feel that it's challenging sometimes, but the way that a manager builds influence is different in that they can take inputs and then make a decision in a very different way. So they can change the way that the team is staffed, for example. And for directors, they can actually heavily pressure people because they can go pressure a manager to move one person from one team to another. So there's like a very clear relationship between what they're saying and what they have the ability to make happen, versus an individual contributor. The most that we can usually do is ask everybody to please do the thing that we want, which is so much. I mean, there's like a very gentle kind of power in that, like it's not that we have no power, it's just that we have to work through people. So you literally just have to be functioning on trust and how people view you. And so perception management is a whole thing. Executive presence is a whole thing. I think there's a lot of bias that can be at play there that I do want to acknowledge. But I do think that relationship building for individual contributors is more about how do you convey the ideas that you have? Are you aware of what other people care about? Can you translate your idea into a message that resonates with other people? And then they'll go advocate on your behalf because they understand how the thing that you want is going to benefit them. Like that is the strategy for how individual contributors have to work. And managers do this too with each other, right? Like, so if one manager wants something from another manager, they also have to take on the same technique. But I think for individual contributors, we have to be much more strategic, because if we are talking to a director and the director doesn't like what we're saying, they can just go to your manager and be like, well, I didn't really like that. Are we sure we should have this person on this project? Like, it's just a very different set of dynamics with pretty much everyone around you. So yeah, I coach people a lot on the way to message, the way that they show up. And it doesn't mean you can't be yourself at work. It just means that you need to recognize that power is at play constantly, and how you show up does affect how much people are open to what you have to say.
Yeah, as you were chatting there, Kat, I was just thinking that it's a lot more effort. And it adds a whole different cognitive load to an IC trying to, because you're navigating this in order to be able to influence without authority. Whereas and for some people, who are in positions of authority and power, some things are just a given. But for an IC, you've got to do a lot more in order to be able to do the thing that you want. So, yeah, I think knowing how to be strategic with it and how to start, and maybe if there's some tips and tricks and all of those things that you can leverage are going to help, because otherwise it's adding even more to the job that you already have to do day to day. Which brings me into the next question, because in your book, you talk about building social capital and mapping stakeholders into different categories. So you're kind of giving some language to this, which is contributors, observers, approvers, and supporters. So can you walk us through how this works and why it matters?
Yes, totally. I do also want to acknowledge that this is part of the reason that like influence is one of the big blockers for a lot of people to transition from senior to staff. I think before the staff level, like if you're a senior designer, if you're a mid-level designer, junior, you don't have to worry about this as much, which is great. But when you get to the staff level, you do have more responsibility, and you will have to most likely learn this. And it is part of the expectation of your role. In fact, a lot of staff, like senior designers trying to get to staff, are told that they don't have enough influence, and that's one of the big things that's keeping them from getting the role. So social capital is one of the major components that essentially is it relates heavily to influence. So the concept of social capital is that over time, through the relationships that you're building with people, you can have these moments where you're essentially like accumulating, a stronger relationship through the conversations that you're having, through the time that you spend together, through your track record of delivering design experiences that work well for customers, that meet the business needs, et cetera. And then you can start to quote unquote spend that capital. So you can say something that's maybe a bit controversial in terms of like the direction that the company's trying to go in. And when you are spending that, essentially you are kind of taking a leap of faith almost, and hoping that what you say kind of comes across how you want. And so you do need to be very strategic about when you are kind of like rocking the boat. And so by understanding where you're at with each person in your work life, that can help you understand, do we have a strong relationship? Do we have a weaker relationship? How much social capital do I have with this person? And so often when I am looking at the work that I could be doing, the work that I am doing, I'm thinking about how much I should be pushing or pulling at any given time in terms of how I want to angle a conversation, how I want to propose a certain decision. And I will even say to my PM, I just honestly don't have a lot of social capital with this leader right now because of this particular previous thing that we were working on together. And I'm trying to build that back. So I'm just gonna kind of listen a little bit more. And I'm not gonna push back a ton unless there's something I really strongly disagree with. And it makes you more strategic in terms of how you are spending your energy, and then it helps you to predict a little bit more or understand why something maybe won't go the direction that you were hoping or why something didn't go in the direction that you were hoping. And then when it comes to mapping, the concept there is that, again, you're actually taking the relationships that you already have in your work life and you're actually sitting down and you're starting to be more strategic about it. So contributors are people that are essentially your peers, people that are directly contributing to the work that you're doing. Observers are people who they need to be informed and aware because your work affects their team's work in some way. Approvers are the people who will literally say yes or no to the work that you're doing. They can stop your project at any given time. So you really want to be aware of who those people are, and you want to have a strong relationship with them. You want to understand what motivates those people in particular because they're extremely powerful. And then you have supporters who are people across the company that don't work directly with you, but you like them and they like you and you just think each other are cool. Now, in the past, when I've mapped this out, I've found out that I have a really strong relationship with direct contributors and supporters, but I didn't have very strong relationships with my approvers. And I had moderate relationships, for example, with my observers. And so I would have these moments where somebody who was in the observer category would be like, hey, actually, I'm really stressed about the way that Catt's team is like implementing this thing, and we haven't considered this particular project. So in a past experience, for example, somebody from the growth team flagged something that I was working on and was like, hey, actually, like, this is a huge risk for growth and we can't release this in this particular way because this is going to have really negative potential effects. And then the approvers were like, okay, got it, no, we're not doing this. So it's very important to make sure that you're aware of, do I have a strong relationship with people who are on like my sibling or cousin teams? Do I have a strong relationship with the people who will make decisions on my product or my project? You want to make sure that you are investing at least some energy in, messaging that person on Slack or Teams, getting quarterly hangouts on the books with those people, et cetera, because they will actually affect your work.
Yeah, so much of what you said is so relevant to what I do day to day. So I work in product operations, and we literally are like a function that has to influence without authority. Change management. So as you're talking, my team and I are going through Switch, which is the how do you take people through behavioral changes. And it's talking about elephant rider and appealing to people's motivations and making sure we actually know we can't just have something happen. You've got to tap into that person and make sure you're taking them along and being strategic about how you're thinking about motivating them. This is a really good way I think I'll bring into our conversations too, because we're starting to do this, but not as nuanced as you just mentioned, where it's like, do we have a good relationship? Is the stakeholder on board? Are they like a bright spot? Are they going to help? Or do we need to work a bit more with the others? So we've already started doing a bit of that stakeholder mapping, but maybe not to the extent that you've mentioned, which is very cool. So I'll definitely be using that day to day and thinking a bit more strategically about that, especially the observers, because as you mentioned, they can just pop up and actually create a lot of drama if you're not careful in managing them. And often we forget about those people as you're trying to work on things. Cap, but I guess for when we talk about social capital, for maybe women and people of color in particular, who maybe don't have access to the same informal networks that others do in companies, like how do you build these relationships authentically without it feeling so transactional? Because like you mentioned, you need to be strategic. So does strategic have to be transactional, or how can you do this?
That's such a great question. I actually had a coaching client who asked a similar question because it can feel very transactional at first to be so, how do I say that? Like to be just so strategic about it and to actually like write all of this down can kind of feel like very like robotic and so on and so forth. I think what I try to do is I am writing all of this down, but I'm also in some ways understanding these people more deeply and kind of treating them a similar way to how I treat my customers. So I'm actually almost like humanizing them a bit more. And so, yes, at first, because you're being very explicit and you're like documenting all of these things, it can feel very like, oh my God, like I'm turning these people into like circles in a diagram. But when you do that work, then you realize, like, oh, actually, I don't really know this person very much. I should go reach out to them. And some of the time that I'm conversing with these people, as I mentioned, I'm thinking about, I'm asking about motivations and like their goals and things like that. And that's work related. But I will also just ask them how they got into the field in the first place. And I just get to know them more as people because frankly, some of the way that business works is very vibey and like based on like how connected people feel to each other. Like some of it of course is wow, that person has a track record, but also some of it is like I like this person. I like the way this person thinks. And so yeah, I think what I am trying to seek is respect at bare minimum and the ability to be cordial. But then some of these approvers, some of these observers, some of these people, you're just going to like them and you're going to think they're really cool. And I think it's okay to lean into that. So sometimes you're just seeing like, okay, are we clicking? On what level do we operate at together? And that's okay. Like I've had directors that I don't really vibe with very much as people. But I've also had people that I'm like, oh my God, you have two cats. They're so cute. Give me all the updates about your cats. And that's great. And you should lean into those when you find those. So yeah, I think I will acknowledge like at first it's going to feel very strategic, but then what you'll notice over time is that you will start to see that there are some people that are just genuinely cool. And when you have that feeling, like lean into that and let that drive you more so that it feels less so. But then in general, yeah, my nudge would be to really consider like on one hand, like documenting these things. It is in some ways it's just going to be a bit weird at first. But then at the same time, it's giving you the chance to really reflect on like, how am I operating and how am I functioning? And like, how do I want to show up? And who should I really be talking to? Because this is a job also. So it's like, if you could be doing your job better by talking to these people more, then I feel like you kind of should figure that out. And that is good information to know. So I think like sometimes designers, they get a bit nervous about like leaning into the fact that it is a job. But like for me, I'm fully on the like acknowledgement that this is like capitalism at work train. And I'm really trying to do the best job that I can. And I know that connecting with certain people, it's just going to make the work faster for my team. And that is a good thing. That's something that everybody wants. So I think it's also important to turn that part of your brain on and like recognize and acknowledge that as well.
As you were saying all of that, and I completely agree with it, it kind of reminded me of how like salespeople treat their relationships. They actually have a CRM. Might not be a diagram, right? And they very much document every relationship they're building, but they don't go into those calls. Well, it is transactional, but they come in with a human angle, right? Because people ultimately buy from people they like, and so it's almost kind of taking that mindset to yourself and being like, well, I am the salesperson of my career, and obviously you have to deliver as well. But yeah, I think it's an interesting perspective. I want to touch back on something you said earlier around, building social capital, because you did say, sometimes you can say, once you've built enough social capital, you can say the controversial thing, you can rock the boat a bit more. But when you join an organization or even a new team for the first time, like you often don't have that social capital. So, how do you think about building influence quickly within an organization? And if you're open to it and have an example you could walk us through, that would be great.
Yeah. So most of the time when I join a company, I will have a plan for the first 30 days, the first 60 days, and the first 90 days. And part of my plan for the first 30 days is just to go and meet as many people who are on my team and who will work with my team as humanly possible. So spending again like 30-minute calls with as many people as I can. And I'll just usually message those people and ask, "Hey, I'm new here. Can we talk?" And then during that conversation I'll ask them, "Oh, who do you think I should talk to, you know, in the future? Like, who's a person I should reach out to that you think is really helpful or influential? Like, this is the stuff I'm going to be working on. And then during, each of these calls, again, I'm asking like, oh, how did you get to this company? Like, what got you into this field? Things like that are very general. And I'll also ask like, oh, do you have any advice for somebody who's new here? Do you have anything that you thought was really useful when you were onboarding or that you've seen work really well? People are usually very open to helping. So I would honestly start there. And then again, you're going to find those people that you click with. Ideally, you're confirming like, oh, who's really powerful, who's not. Like people will sometimes just straight up tell you. One other thing I would recommend is check your network on LinkedIn before you join and see if you know anybody who either works at the company now or used to work at the company, and interview those people and just buy them coffee or something and just ask them like, hey, what was your experience like? Who should I talk to? Who can I trust? Who can I not trust? And you will find so much valuable information out from that. And then that can help the way that you approach people. So literally when I joined my current employer, that's what I did. I was like, hey, friends, like, I know that you used to work here and you don't. Let me know what's going on. And they fully prepared me for showing up on day one. And I knew who to reach out to, who was cool people, who maybe like I need to be a little bit more aware of and like make sure that I, present in a certain way that's like very buttoned up, things like that. So I think that's number one. And then I would also highly recommend just ask a lot of questions. Like when you're new, especially if you're new to a staff design role, like you may feel a lot of internal pressure to like show that you're good immediately. But one mistake I see a lot of people making is that they come in and they're like, this is bad, this needs to change. Like, why are we doing this? This is ridiculous. That is going to subtract so much social capital before you have any. And I have witnessed this from people before too, where it's just like, oh, honey, no. And I just, it really hurts to see. But like inversely, like I've literally seen one person doing that and then another person just asking curious questions, and people have literally DM'd me and been like, wow, look how great this person is for just like, they're also just as new and they're just asking questions and they're so curious and they just want to learn. And that comes across so much better and makes people open, which is what you want. Like you're trying to show people that you're just here to do good work. And when people recognize that in you, then they want to help you because they think that you'll probably help them and that you're good at your job. So yeah, just I would be curious. I would reach out to people. I would ask a lot of questions. After month one, you ideally do have a perspective on things and you can start to slowly deliver some value for real. But yeah, when you're new, the other thing I'll say is that as you're going around surveying people, take notes in some way. You can use AI for that, whatever. But like you want to summarize those notes and notice the patterns in terms of what people are telling you. And then you can start to actually ask people who are directors and who have more power about some of the patterns that you're noticing. So for example, like the founder is often very involved in decision making for things. We keep going this direction and then we zigzag to the other direction. Patterns like that. And then you can like ask leaders like, oh, hey, like I've heard a couple people say this. Are we thinking about how we're gonna, like, what are we thinking about that? How does that feel to you? Like you can start to then consult them on figuring out like where are they at, how much does that matter to them, and then that can help you again learn their motivations, and then they can start to see you as a person who has their finger on the pulse of what's happening at the company, because that's what leaders also really value in somebody who's an individual contributor. They like that person who, they go around, that person goes around and like kind of checks the vibe and then reports the vibe, because a lot of times leaders don't actually see that stuff, and it can be really valuable to have that information.
Yeah, I think when you're a leader, or when you are a leader, you're often in a yes bubble where people will only tell you the things they think you want to hear. I really liked your point on having those calls. I remember when I joined an organization as a chief of staff a few years ago, and that is like very much an IC role, but you're quite senior as well. It was a small company. There was about 50 of us. In those first 2 weeks, I had a 30-minute call with everybody, and it was very positive. But there were two themes that came out that were, shall we say, a bit problematic. So one was about the product. There was this continuous concern about the product being problematic in some ways. But the second, there was actually a cultural piece to like bring that was like everyone just kept iterating this culture piece that could be improved as well. And I had, all this documented, and then it came to actually having to communicate this to the founder in this case. But communicating as an IC up to like senior leaders or executive teams, I find the dynamics are different because there is a power dynamic. And also, whether you're newer in the company or not, you don't necessarily want to be seen as like the naysayer, the person who's always delivering the negative message, etc. So, I guess, do you have any advice on one, how to communicate upwards to execs in general, but also specifically if you have a difficult message to convey, how do you approach that?
Yes, this is something I spent a lot of time thinking about because I've been on projects where a leader's really passionate about something, and then we do a bunch of research and we learn that customers won't buy that, for example. And it can be really challenging. I think that what I try to understand in terms of communicating challenging messages. So if it's, for example, like, hey, the team is really demotivated and the way that you said this one thing in this meeting has really rubbed a bunch of people the wrong way, for example, then I think like usually I'll say that I've observed something and, a number of people have mentioned this to me and I know that you meant well by this. However, this is kind of what I'm hearing. And, I might say something like, oh, I think what I'm hearing that the team needs right now is maybe a particular thing. So like, for example, yeah, it's hard. I've seen situations where, for example, a leader has been really pro craft and communicated this in a way that made individual contributors on the team feel like their work was never good enough, that they were bad designers, etc. And so what I did in that case is I went to the director who had been saying these things and I said, hey, so I've been meeting with these ICs and great system thinkers. Maybe their relationship with visual design isn't the strongest. I know you mean well. So that's one thing. I know you mean well as a phrase goes a long way, like acknowledging their intentions, huge. I know you mean well, but when you say that their work is not good without showing them what good looks like, then they internalize that. And so if we want them to improve, then what we actually need is to show them what good looks like. And then potentially maybe we also need to invest some funds into some training because the fastest way for ICs to improve is often with training. And so in one case, I did this and they ended up paying for Shift Nudge, which is a visual design training course for a lot of members of the team. And basically anybody could opt into it. And that was really helpful. So that was a situation where I was like, hey, buddy, I know you mean well, but like, this is not going over the way you think. And it was really helpful. And so I would suggest in situations where you need to deliver hard conversations or hard feedback, have some kind of a solution that people can opt into and say yes to relatively immediately, because that can be really valuable for them. You can also, of course, ask an open-ended question if you just observe something culturally that's not about what the leader did. So when it comes to asking questions about things like, hey, like I'm seeing general burnout just from the amount of meetings that people have. How are we thinking about this? Like I'll say something like that, like how are we thinking about is that intended? Like what is our plan there? Because I kind of want to say like, you as the leader have the power to change this. I'm just a person. Like I'm not going to say like cut the meetings, they're all useless, because they're not. It's just that like I'm observing that this is kind of grinding people to dust and we don't want that. So how are we going to change that? So that's one other example. And then when it comes to general communication, I do also try to make sure that I'm always speaking with active language versus passive language. So instead of saying like, oh, this happened, then it's more like we did this. And that's more active than this happened. Like there was research, like we did research is much better. And ideally you say I and the researcher's name conducted research with these people and we learned this. So I always nudge people on how they talk because it is something that takes practice. Some people learned this at a younger age than other people. I didn't learn this until I got onto the job. But yeah, the way that you speak does affect how people perceive you. And executives also just don't have a lot of time So you want to get the message across to them as quickly as possible, make it so that they can understand what your recommendation is, and then they can either say yes or no, and or request changes, etc. But yeah, they're context switching all the time. They just don't have time for like the roundabout.
I was just reflecting because I manage a team at the moment, and obviously I'm trying to coach them also and help them, and also give them the opportunity when it's their work to present themselves directly to leadership, right? So they're doing and running the meetings. But it is interesting how you kind of gotta, like, if you haven't been exposed to it, you're not automatically going to understand what an exec is looking for, and how it's quite different in how you've got to package it and what you've got to say and how brief you've got to be and the points that you've got to touch on. It doesn't necessarily come naturally for people if you haven't interacted with them. And I was reflecting, and actually early on in my career, I started off as like an auditor, an accountant in South Africa, which I changed direction in. But one of the things it taught me, that was my first job, like out of university, and I was straight in a room with execs. I was dealing with C-suite, going to them, speaking to them, engaging with them to sort out like auditing numbers. But it meant that I did understand how they worked, and then you carry that. But then yes, you got to learn that skill and figure it out if maybe you haven't had that exposure. So that's a really good point. A little bit linked, I guess, to having these difficult conversations and maybe saying things that people don't want to hear is, Kat, you've mentioned that being overwhelmed by your workload isn't a moral failing. So I'm curious as to how do you protect your time and set boundaries, right? As a staff level IC, when expectations are very high.
That's so real. Yeah, I think a lot of people, as they're making the transition, struggle with time management and boundary setting. The way that I approach this is I try to be open, of course, about ideas that people bring to me or requests that people bring to me. But a lot of the time management piece is actually that people think that they're being assigned work by people. So like if a PM comes to you and says, "Hey, can you modify these slides?" Then they're like, "Oh, got to drop other stuff and go do this, and then I'll get back to my work." And then suddenly it's 8 p.m. and I'm still working. You can actually ask how critical those slides are in comparison to the work that you're doing at that moment. And then that is a small boundary setting that you're doing by asking that question. So a lot of times my number one technique that I'll tell people to do on top of auditing how they spend their time in general is to literally just start asking people those kinds of questions and have them almost prioritize your work with you versus it kind of being this like you versus them and everybody is just kind of zapping you of your time. So I do a lot of boundary setting in very small ways. Like I usually don't say, "No, I don't have time for that right now," because you can say that, but I'll be honest with you, a lot of the times if you approach a request like that, people like that'll subtract a little bit of social capital. And we don't want that. If we want to have strong relationships with people, then I think this is where like the improv kind of like yes and approach can be really valuable. So it's like, love that you've come to me for this thing. How does this compare to the other thing that I'm doing at the moment? I feel like maybe this is like more critical. So I'm happy to do this by like 3 days from now, but I just have this really big deadline right now. So I don't think that I can at this moment. If that's not fine for you, then, I would recommend you reach out to this other person. I do a lot of that kind of boundary setting all the time. And it makes it clear to people, I want to help you. I want us all to win. Also, I have other things that I'm doing. So I would definitely recommend that. And then the other thing that I always nudge people to do, as I mentioned, is to audit how you're spending your time. So a lot of times people won't actually block out their focus time. And so when somebody looks at a designer's calendar and they just see open, free time, that person will just go put meeting times wherever they want. But if you actually block out 2, 3 hours, whatever, and you can use different products for this. So like Reclaim is one of them that I use right now. And you can just put those blocks down. And then literally people reach out to me and they say, "Hey, I noticed that you have this focus time. Is it okay if I need to meet with you for 30 minutes?" And I can be like, "Well, you can put this over here." Is that fine for you? It just makes people think about how you spend your time. I would also recommend, of course, blocking out your lunch and anything else that you need to do. But yeah, making your calendar reflect how you're actually spending your time is really important. And then you may notice that when you audit how you spend your time, maybe you're doing a lot of one-to-ones again with like supporters and other people who maybe aren't as impactful in terms of how smoothly your work will be delivered. Maybe you need to adjust the cadence of those meetings. That's something else I do on a quarterly basis. I have like a little reminder to myself to do some calendar cleanup, and I go through and I check like who am I meeting with weekly? Who am I meeting with every 2 weeks? Are those the right cadences for the amount of work I have to do right now? And that is also helpful for getting some time back sometimes. Ideally, you get to a place where, again, you have like at least 2 hours of focus time per day, if not 4 or 6 or the whole day.
I really like one of the things you said was the improv yes and approach, right? That you mentioned there, which is such a small thing, but it's just how you get back to someone. Catt, we've spoken a lot about all these things you've done with influencing without authority, but you've also built, well, in your workspace and in the company, but you've also built influence far beyond your job title through various different things. And how has building a voice and community outside of your employer actually amplified your influence within it?
Yeah, it's been really cool to see where my energy takes me and to have the ability to explore different avenues like game development and so on. I think it's been great because the fact that I'm connected externally and can explore so many things means I have a lot of inputs that help me to understand or to put my job and the things that happen at my job in context. So, one way that's been really valuable, for example, is the speaking that I do, the teaching that I do connects me to other people at other companies. And if things are like whether there's highs or lows at my job, I understand how similar or different that is from the broader industry. And a lot of people, they get tunnel vision and they think, oh my God, everything here sucks or, whatever. And I love telling people, hey, I've heard this like 10 times this week. Like actually, this is kind of just a phase that everybody's going through at this very moment. So you're not alone. And I think that gives me more of an ability to, frankly, sometimes just like get through the storm when there is a storm, or I have something to look forward to in some cases as well. And then I also would say that I get a lot of inspiration from places that I wouldn't quite expect, whether it's just hearing how other people are approaching the design process and the product development process, or sometimes by seeing how people develop games, for example, I get inspired to kind of figure out new ways that we could be building products. So I think there's, to use a really corporate term, there's a lot of synergy there for me. And I think that with angel investing also, it gives me the chance to kind of support who I want to see as leaders. So I can put my money toward founder who hopefully becomes the next CEO at a company that's pretty big. And my approach to that is to kind of pay it forward, to take the experiences I've had at startups and at companies that are trying to scale and get to IPO, and to be able to share my experience with those kinds of leaders. So usually I'm investing in either women, people of color, ideally women of color, and I have like a whole investment thesis. But yeah, that's another way that I'm kind of taking my experience from the work that I've done, I'm applying it and supporting people. But then also they teach me things. They give me a space to experiment with new workflows. I'm also, I get to build out more of a portfolio and just have a break from, if I'm working at a large company, things are a lot slower. So it's really nice to be able to ship things quickly. So yeah, there's just like a nice feedback loop. A lot of this stuff is very symbiotic, I guess you could say. For me, it's all like very connected and it gives me a lot of energy.
I completely get that. I think being able to work on projects that operate at different speeds is very underrated. Like sometimes in past jobs, I would get so frustrated because my role at that moment in time was very much at the what I would call like project management level, which was like getting people to do things rather than getting hands-on work myself. And I find if I am able to actually have something where I'm doing hands-on alongside that, I get way less frustrated at the program management part of my role at times. I find when it comes to like thinking about broadening, I guess, your interests or, you know, your portfolio outside of work, there's like people tend to fall into two camps, which is like, I have 100 ideas, I don't know where to start, or I have no ideas, or I don't know where I could deliver value, where do I start? So I guess from your experiences, what do you think is the most accessible way to start branching out and building kind of a side portfolio?
I would recommend trying to, number one, attend a conference, especially if you can do one in person. I found that to be really valuable to just start to kind of broaden my horizons a little bit. Then I would suggest exploring speaking at a conference if you're comfortable with that, or you can try being a little bit more active on LinkedIn, or you can start your own blog. Like it's easier than ever to literally make your own website with its own content management system. So that's something that you could explore. I think in general, what I suggest to people is to consider what gives them energy, because if you're doing this outside of work, ideally it's something that you like doing. So I like teaching. I really enjoy teaching. I love writing. Everything I do outside of work is something that is essentially a hobby for me and enjoyable in some way. So I don't encourage hustle culture. The thing that I care more about is that people are spending time doing things that they find interesting and that kind of help them grow in some way as a person. And, you know, it's extra beneficial if you then get to earn more money from it. If you eventually have a picture of yourself doing some other job, that's also a way to approach it, and that's totally fine. And you could think about where you want to go and how your side project could help you get there. I would start with a really, really simple version of that, very like MVP, to use tech phrasing. I would think about the smallest, simplest thing that you could do. That's why I was saying, like maybe go to a conference, like if you, I don't know, like if you want to get into like freelancing or you want to get into ceramics, like is there like a workshop you can take? Is there a continuing education class you can take? I think I would start with what are you curious about? What gives you energy? And then I would think about the simplest way to just try that out for like a couple months, a very small commitment. Do not ideally, like I've started a lot of things that have become multi-year commitments, and those are good too. But ideally it's something that you can do in a couple days, a couple weeks, a couple months, just to understand and to be able to take space and reflect afterward on if that was something that you liked and you want to continue or not.
I think that's great advice. And actually, that's what ended up happening for me and how I branched out into all of these things that I do on the side that contribute to my career. I ended up writing a very small, simple, medium article on business operations and product operations because that's what I was feeling and thinking about at the time. Somebody many months later saw that and invited me to speak at a product operations conference, which was like the first one. And from there, I got an outpouring of people contacting me, and that became a podcast. So you never know from starting that first step what the next thing will be and what the next organic move will be and how that evolves. So yeah, that's great advice, Kat. We could probably speak to you and dig into a lot of the things you said in greater detail, but we are at time. So I wanted to just end on one final question, which is if a listener finishes this episode and they want to start building more influencers and IC tomorrow or straight after the episode's done, what are the first 2 or 3 things they should do?
I would definitely start by checking for the lay of the land, understanding the current state of your relationships at work. And then I would most likely go reach out to maybe 3 people who I might need to actually build a stronger working relationship with, and get those meetings on the calendar for 30 minutes with each person. They can just be one-off meeting to start, and then maybe during the conversation or after the conversation, you can propose turning that into a long-standing one-to-one. But yeah, I think number one, map out the current state of your working relationships. Number two, once you will probably see that there's people you should be connecting with. Go do that ASAP. That would be my recommendation.
Great. Those are 2 things that people can start doing straight away. And then, Kat, before we let you go, if listeners want to get in touch with you or find out more about your courses, your books, all of these things, what's the best way for them to contact you or find out?
Yes, so you can go to cattsmall.com, CATTSMALL.com. I am also on LinkedIn. That's my handle on there. And you can also search me there. And then if you want to get the staff designer, you can do that on Rosenfeld Media's website, or you can do it on Amazon if you want. If you do it that way, please leave a review. And then you can find me on Maven as well. If you search my name, I should show up there. And yeah, I'm always talking about being a staff designer and leading without direct authority. It's really fun. You can also find me on Blue Sky, actually. I'm on there, and I think my username is cat.design, CATT.design.
Amazing. We will be sure to put all of those in the show notes, including, I think, a discount for the other half listeners for some of the things that Kat has mentioned, and we'll get those in there. But thank you very much for chatting to us today, Kat.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us.
Amazing. Thanks so much for having me.
If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, review, and subscribe. It really helps others find us. Even better, share it with a friend or colleague who needs to hear this. Thanks, and see you next time.